Hey everybody, what's going on? It's Arty again, and finally, we are able to have conclude our conversation that I was having with ArchAngel. As you recall, we had a discussion about a week and a half ago, and unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, we had to end our discussion prematurely. But finally, we're back here. As we agreed earlier, I believe ArchAngel, you wanted a few minutes to reintroduce yourself, so I'll go ahead and give that to you right now. And yeah, I'll you can take it from here.
Awesome. Well, first of all, again, Artie, I do wish to thank you for hosting this live debate as to these issues. These are very important issues that certainly are having varying disagreements as to its interpretation and so forth. But ultimately, I believe that, you know, we should all be able to respect each other and um, at the end of the day be able to reason these things out. And so that is my goal. Again, I am Archangel for Truth. Some of you know me, some of you don't. Ultimately, I again identify myself as being a Christian sovereign constitutionalist. So please do not refer to me as a sovereign citizen. Those those two things are not the same. But I do recognize, and this government recognizes that we have sovereign rights, and those are inalienable God-given rights. And ultimately, um, I believe that uh, these rights are such that we need to respect them, especially from the government. But I do want to open up with a scripture here, as I did before,
Sure.
and this is taken from Daniel chapter 2, verses 44, and it says, "During the reigns of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed or conquered. It will crush and put an end to all these other kingdoms, and it will stand forever." So, with that being said, let us begin.
Awesome. All right. Thank you very much. And I agree with you. Like I said, I'm a firm believer in respect begets respect. If you treat me well, I'll treat you well in kind, and vice versa. At the same time, if you're going to be disrespectful to me, then I'm going to give you, in give in kind. But and I'm not saying you have been by any means. You and I, we have been able to have a conversation with each other in this regard. So, I want to keep it that way. So, excuse me. So on that, I'm trying to. I have my sheet of 10 questions here, and I still have my notes on here. So I'm trying to refresh my recollection on where we were when the conversation when our discussion ended, and if you recall it better than I, please by all means make it known. I think I had one or two questions remaining in our discussion, and I think
Oh,
I wasn't able to get a full answer on this one that I had here, so I want to go ahead and start with that, and we can go from there.
sure.
And it relates to the Ninth Amendment. And my question is, do you? And it's a question, but I want to provide context to the question. So, but the question is, do you think that your interpretation of the Ninth Amendment is objective or subjective? And here I go. In a video you uploaded on July 11th, 2020, you asserted that the determination by a state's motor vehicle agency that driving slash operating slash traveling with your car was a privilege was improper. However, New Jersey state law, and I'm giving New Jersey as an example here, there are other states that probably have similar laws in place. New Jersey law explicitly states that a person may not operate a motor vehicle without having a license. See NJSA 39:3-10. That is a statute. In other words, that is a law that's passed by a legislature and not simply a decree originating from the motor vehicle agency. So my question to you is, do you think that your interpretation of the Ninth Amendment is it objective or subjective? And when I say that, in the context of the licensure of driving a motor vehicle.
Right. So that's a lot to take in there, but I'll try my best. So as it pertains to the Department of Motor Vehicles, and they're making a determination as to it being a privilege and not a right. The whole question there, as it pertains to the agencies that are there to regulate what the state determines, is, does the agency have the authority to make determinations as it pertains to what are rights or what are privileges? Now, maybe for New Jersey, they've made that determination from your legislature, and that's a completely different issue. But the agency of itself, you see, the whole question when it comes down to whether driving is a right or a privilege is, 9 times out of 10, when you ask someone in law enforcement, they'll say that driving is not a right; it's a privilege. That's what they'll tell you. But when you ask them where did they get that from, 9 times out of 10 they have no clue, and oftentimes it's taken from the Department of Transportation or DMV or whatever they go to as their regulating agency to back that claim up. And so what I'm saying there is the agency d- does not have the authority to make any determinations as to what are rights or what are privileges. So that's the argument that I am making when I make that statement, that the agency does not have that authority. So, as it pertains to whether I feel my understanding of the ninth is objective or subjective. So, you know, one of the things that many different sovereigns may choose to go to is they go to different codes and things like that, like the UC codes or
Mm-hmm.
Black Law Dictionary. We know that this is something that has uh, been recorded on numerous of videos. But I did not present those arguments. I presented
Mm-hmm.
constitutional arguments. And in so doing, I didn't simply express my own views, but I shared views that are shared by legal experts like Supreme Justice Gorsuch, or a legal expert such as Judge Napolitano. And so they are actually expressing their views as it pertains to the ninth. And therefore, based upon what they've expressed, I have also expressed myself in the same manner. So if my views are considered to be subjective, you would have to include these legal experts also as being subjective as well. And I would say, given the fact that there are legal experts that have a variety of different views on the ninth, and it shouldn't be surprising, because whenever it comes to legal interpretation, you get people that have all sorts of interpretation, judges that have all sorts of interpretations, and that's why you, even in the Supreme Court, you have dissenting views
Right.
and disagreements on many things. So I would say that my view is supported, at least by um, the legal experts that I have shared so far.
Okay. Well, so I have two follow-ups on there, and I think this is partially my fault because I mixed specifically on the DMC and right to travel with also the Ninth Amendment. But on the right to travel part, the reason why I brought that up, brought the issue up with your issue with the DMC with our motor vehicle agencies, is I brought up New Jersey to show that while a police officer will often say, okay, it's motor vehicle regulation that requires you to have a license. The reason I brought up my issue, what my statement was that the Motor Vehicle Agency of New Jersey is not the originator of this requirement. They're not the ones who are making this determination that driving is a privilege. They are authorized to make these regulations that require you to give a license from the legislature. The legislature itself, they get that authority from the police powers that are afforded to them, that is considered to be afforded to them by their own constitutions, and also the Supreme Court of the United States. The Supreme Court of the United States said as much that driving or operating a motor vehicle, or the states can regulate the act of operating a motor vehicle on their highways through licensure and registration in Hedrick versus Maryland. And if we are going to assert, that the Supreme Court, the federal judiciary and the Supreme Court is tasked with the interpretation of the Constitution, then if we're going to adhere to the rule of law, then we adhere to what the Supreme Court says, what the states can and can't do. And in that instance, there is Supreme Court precedent stating that the states can regulate the operation of a motor vehicle within their jurisdictions. The second part on that, and then going on to your Ninth Amendment issue, I also go to the same route, in a similar route. Yes, you may say that Gorsuch and Napolitano saying, however, you are gleaning an interpretation based on what they say. I can't recall whether Napolitano's interpretation of saying the right to travel means you don't have to have a license to operate a motor vehicle. I haven't heard Gorsuch say during his Senate hearing confirmation that the Ninth Amendment encompasses the ability to travel freely without the need for an operator's license. So you are saying, based on what Gorsuch is saying about the Ninth Amendment, I'm going to interpret that to mean that I don't need a license to travel. So that's where I'm getting that's where I'm saying that your opinion is subjective in that regard, because you are applying a view on X, operating a motor vehicle without a license, to Y, Gorsuch's interpretation of the Ninth Amendment. That's you, and not necessarily Gorsuch.
Is that a question?
No, I'm sorry. I guess that was more of a rebuttal than a follow up than anything else. But if you want to respond to that, please, by all means, go ahead, and then I'll take a question from you.
Okay. So the whole question that we're really dancing around is sovereignty. Okay, the state's sovereignty as regards to the 10th Amendment, and ultimately individual sovereignty. And this is why, when we discussed last time, I made it a point to point out that the 10th Amendment powers are not just state powers, okay? It includes the people and individually. And this is why it says in the 10th Amendment, or to the people. Well, I've actually asked a legal expert what that means, more than one actually. And, as regards to the word or, I have an attorney, a well-known attorney. You might know him, Steve Latos. Are you familiar with him?
Steve Latos? No, I'm not familiar. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I have a recording as regards to what he says as regards to the word or. I'd like to play that.
Sure.
Um,
First thing you have to notice is they use the word or. Or is we call it disjunctive. Disjunctive. It means that if I tell you you can pick among these three items, this, or this, this one can work, this one can work, or this one can work.
So, what I'm saying there, as it pertains to the 10th, there is a failure by law enforcement to recognize the fact that we, the people, have 10th Amendment powers. And as such, when it comes to making determinations as to what are laws or what are things that we choose to accept, the very first question you asked me was, how do I determine what laws I choose to accept? And so, it's a choice. And the reason why I say it's a choice is because the Declaration of Independence clearly says that it is a choice. It's called the consent of the governed. If there's no consent, then there's no ability for the government to basically say, well, we're going to tell you what you can and cannot do. And the 10th reaffirms that fact by including the people in the powers not delegated to the United States.
So do you? Well, a clarifying question: do you think that when it comes to the Declaration and what you just said there, are you considering the people, the governed, as each individual person, or as a collective people, as in the group, the citizenry, the base voter, the base electorate, or in other words, the consent of the governed as in the voting populace? Or are you suggesting that in order for any government to exercise authority, each individual has to consent to it?
Right. So when we look at the Declaration of Independence, it's saying that these unalienable rights among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are not collective rights, these are individual rights. And as such, it is therefore individually we have this authority. And so the idea that, our voice is only a collective voice or a collective right is also was uh, proven not to be so in the case, I can't think of the name, where it was pertaining to gun rights being an individual right. Okay, so, again,
Which is
I
also
definitely,
which was also determined by the Supreme Court, correct?
well, right, well, sure, but it does it doesn't change the fact. Even you acknowledged the fact that Justice Scalia, when making this determination, he did so by referring to the Declaration of Independence.
Right. He used it under that premise on that arms, that individual firearms, the fact that firearms were being taken away by the British as an example of an infringement, and therefore he interpreted the Second Amendment to be an individual right. But you're mixing and matching here. I'm not talking about the right to free speech or the right to peaceably assemble. I'm talking, which can be and are individual rights. My issue here is that you are suggesting that in order to be subject to the laws that are passed under the authority of the Constitution requires the individual consent of everybody, rather than simply saying that the people as a collective elected and ratified this Constitution to be effectual on everybody within the territorial bounds of it. That you understand where I'm saying that there's a distinction there. between being subject to the laws passed under the Constitution versus the individual rights that are protected under the Constitution?
Right. But, again, when you go to the way the Declaration of Independence is articulated, it's not talking about a collective right. It's talking about individual rights. And so,
It's an individual rights that are infringed. Correct. I'm not disputing that at all. What I'm saying is you are also suggesting that in order because you go from the Declaration, which is an errance of grievances. It's Festivus. So you have the Declaration, right? But then you have the Constitution, which is supposed to be a binding, statement of law, right? It's supposed to be a law, like the Constitution itself. It's like, this is how our government is supposed to be formed. But you are suggesting that regardless of whether it's been ratified by a majority vote of the electorate of the colonies, that each and every person must individually declare their consent to be under this Constitution, under this law, in order for it to be enforceable. And that's where I'm having an issue with, because I've never heard that offered before in any other kind of society in world history. This is something that's very different, because most people would assume that you are subject to the laws of the nation state that you're within its territorial bounds, regardless of whether you voiced your consent to it or not.
Right. Well, if you recall, last time I played your recording of the consent of the governed by Judge Napolitano, and so certainly Judge Napolitano is considered a legal expert. I am not, but certainly he is. And he stated factually that it is an individual right. And so, I mean...
No. Well, it's not... Again, he's saying... You're suggesting that he's saying that adherence to the laws passed by Congress and or your state legislature are subject to individual vocal consent, or else they are unenforceable. That is what
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. That's exactly that's what I'm getting from what you're saying. But if you want to clarify, go ahead.
Sure. So what Judge Napolitano said was, and he asked a pointed question in that recording. Basically asked, "Did you consent to this?" And he says, "I don't know anybody that has. So if we didn't consent to it, then either the government must follow what it's doing, or we individually can abolish the government, and so ultimately, even if you disagree with that, again, this goes to individual sovereignty and what are inalienable rights. So I guess for me, my question would be, George, you, Arty, is what are inalienable rights and how did we get them?
Well, I think you did ask me something similar, like in our previous conversation, like where do our rights come from? And if we are going to go to the Declaration of Independence, it is suggested that these rights come from our Creator. They are not arbitrarily handed to us by others or by other men in that respect. So inalienable rights to speech, to assembly, to air our grievances, those are rights that come from somebody beyond an individual who has the ability to take them away. They're not governed by somebody within his individual power. My understanding, but where I would preface that is that I do not also adhere to this idea that let's put it this way. Even if I would suggest that they are not given or taken from us by men or our fellow man, they are enforced and protected by men. And because of that, we need to have a system of government that will control the actions of those men who have that power to protect and or restrict those inalienable rights. And in order for us to have that, we would need to have a strong written document to control and to clearly state what their powers are, right? So, but going towards that comes with an obligation. But I'm going too far into the weeds. But going back to answering your specific question, I think they come from beyond. However, they are beyond men. However, they are protected and enforced by men.
Okay. And I would agree that the purpose of government is for the purpose of protecting our rights. The purpose of government is not to diminish any of our rights, whether they be enumerated or not. And that's part of the problem we have here, is because I am asserting a Ninth Amendment unenumerated right to drive.
But I think that goes down to the crux of our disagreement here. You are suggesting I'm saying you are saying that the licensure of the ability to operate a motor vehicle is a deprivation of those inalienable rights. But that's an interpretation that you are making. I am saying that many people have made that argument before, and the courts who are in charge of interpreting the Constitution, which defines those rights, says otherwise, saying no, the requirement to have a license does not violate your Ninth Amendment rights. And so that's where I'm saying, like, there's an issue of subjectivity in interpretation, because that's what it comes down to. It comes down to, how do you interpret the text of the Ninth Amendment? How do you interpret the phrase, the right to travel? And that comes down to who is in charge, who is given authority to make that interpretation, and does that person have power to say, this is what the law says, this is what the Constitution says, you got to take it or leave it. You see what I'm saying?
Well, I understand what you're saying, but I mean, I totally disagree with it. Listen, when the Declaration of Independence was written, there was no judicial review over it. So this idea that the Supreme Court has the authority now to determine what are inalienable rights and whether or not the government needs to respect that goes well beyond their authority. That is.
So, are you challenging Marbury versus Madison, essentially?
I'm sorry?
Well, that's where Marbury versus Madison essentially wrote down that the power of judicial review. That is one of the earliest court cases that's the founding principle of what SCOTUS is there for.
Right.
So you're challenging that, essentially.
So what I'm saying, first of all, there's a lot as regards to that I can go into Marbury versus Madison. First of all, you don't have any history judicial review that it could depend upon to come to that conclusion in the first point. But the second point is that it's referring to constitutional rights. It's not talking about inalienable rights or unenumerated rights, and that right there is a distinction that needs to be understood. And so, you know, I there are legal experts on your side of the issue. There are legal experts on my side of the issue as well. I would like to also share a legal expert that does agree with what I'm saying. And so his name is Randy Barnett. I don't know if you've ever heard of him before, but before I share what he has to say as regards to the Declaration of Independence that would disagree with what you're saying, I want to share his qualifications so you know that it's not just some backwoods sovereign, saying this and this and that. This is someone that's very qualified to from I guess a legal expert point of view to make these determinations. So these are his qualifications. I'm gonna play that.
Well known to many here is Randy Barnett, the Carmack Waterhouse Professor of Legal Theory at Georgetown. He teaches constitutional law and contracts and is director of the Georgetown Center for the Constitution. A recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship in Constitutional Studies, Professor Barnett has published 12 books, more than 100 articles and reviews, and numerous op-eds. His most recent work, Our Republican Constitution, Securing the Liberty and Sovereignty of We the People, is an important book you all should read. In 2004, Professor Barnett argued Gonzalez v. Raich before the United States Supreme Court. And in 2012, he was one of the lawyers representing the National Federation of Independent Business in its constitutional challenge to the Affordable Care Act. In addition to his significant appellate cases, it's worth noting that after graduating from Harvard Law School, Professor Barnett began his career trying felony cases as a prosecutor in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office in Chicago.
So those are his qualifications, but this is what he says as regards to the Declaration of Independence.
Okay.
I stressed about it being officially adopted is that this is not Randy Barnett's theory. The theory that is enunciated in the Declaration is not Randy Barnett's theory of the Constitution. It is not a libertarian theory of the Constitution. It was the officially adopted American theory of the Constitution, and the fact that it was officially adopted, and John Locke was not officially adopted, Montesquieu was not officially adopted, these other folks were. The word of the public meaning of the Declaration is what was officially adopted, and I cite that as authority greater than myself for why it is. Those are the rights retained by the people. Those are the unalienable rights retained by the people, and I would say is relevant context, for example, to how you would interpret the Ninth Amendment, which refers to the rights retained by the people.
Okay, so
I'm sorry, but I would say, at what point does he say anything about Ninth Amendment's applicability to the licensure of driver's licenses?
Right. So what he's doing there is he is making a connection between the inalienable rights as so described in the Declaration of Independence and the Ninth Amendment, and how one would interpret that. Now, we acknowledge that these rights are inalienable, that they're God-given, that they are not determined by the government. So if we acknowledge that fact, that we have these inalienable rights, then I would say that these inalienable rights are not subject to judicial review. I mean, that is how I'm ultimately
But see, if I were to agree with you about that, and I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that premise in the first place, but let's say I agree that the Declaration talks about these unalienable rights and that they are connected to the Ninth Amendment. At no point during the quote that you made, the commentary that you played for us, does it relate to the issue of the right to travel, and on top of that, the issuance of the state's authority to require the licensure of operators of motor vehicles. See, that's where it comes down to. Even if I were to agree with you about the connection between the Declaration of Independence and the Ninth Amendment, you, not them, not Randy Barnett or Judge Napolitano, you are the one who is saying, because I'm saying, you're the one who is saying right to travel, driver's licenses, inalienable rights, Ninth Amendment, there go, protected. That's you, not them. That's you who's making that connection. You're the one who's providing that link in the chain. And that's where I'm saying is that that's where I'm saying you're not providing the evidence to support that. You're providing evidence to support the idea that the unalienable rights listed under the listed under the Declaration of Independence is reflected under the Ninth Amendment, but you still haven't made that connection, that supporting a connection from the Ninth Amendment to I don't need a license to drive. That's where the issue's at. That's where the issue's at.
Well, I would disagree with that because ultimately, the Ninth Amendment clearly says that unenumerated rights shall not be denied or disparaged. Now, if we're going to agree that, that we have inalienable rights, that these rights are not determined by the government, then to say that driving isn't an inalienable right would be to deny and disparage it.
How so?
Well,
see, that's the thing. Is that according to you, or do you have something to back up? In other words, do you have supporting evidence to say that they driving, operating your motor vehicle or car, automobile, whatever the heck you want, that it falls under these unalienable rights? And if you're saying that you don't have specific supporting evidence for that, that's where I'm saying that's where you're injecting your own subjectivity into the argument.
Well, I disagree with it because, ultimately the Ninth is very clear as regards to who it is that determines what these rights are. And it says, and so I'm going to ask you, it says that the rights are retained by the people. So I'm asking you, Arty, what does it mean when it says retained by the people? Since we just heard Randy make the connection to those individual inalienable rights, what does it mean?
Well, here's the thing. That goes to the crux of what my earlier question was. You are essentially saying that the Ninth Amendment is a subjective determination, meaning any individual, you, me, or anybody else, can simply say, I, in fact, can do X, Y, or Z because I have the unalienable right to do X, Y, or Z because Ninth Amendment. And the Ninth Amendment is to the people, aka me, meaning I can say whatever the heck I want it to mean. And it's an unalienable right because I'm a member of the people. That is a textbook definition of subjectivity. It is subject to each individual's interpretation of what the Ninth Amendment says.
Right. So if we go according to history, okay, when the founding fathers decided that they were going to rebel against England, they rebelled against the laws of England. What gave them that right? What gave them a right to form a government? What gave them that right?
Are you asking? Are you actually asking me that question?
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm asking.
I mean, if you like, technically nobody did.
Okay, so nobody gave them that right. No one gave them the right to form a government. No one gave them a right to leave the laws or the jurisdiction of the King of England. Well, if they asserted such a right, then so can we. And the idea that there's a need for a judicial review to make that determination is bunk. It's historical fantasy,
Well,
and that's part of the problem.
well, that's the thing. Well, here's the thing. Like, you are free to believe whatever you want to believe. I mean, that the founders were free to believe whatever the heck they wanted to believe, right? But they ended up having to exert violence in order to secure what their beliefs were in terms of fighting against the crown. Now, if you want to say that if you're wanting to say that you are willing to go that far into suggesting that you don't need a license to operate your motor vehicle based on your belief of what your rights are, and that's where your rights are interpreted, fine. I mean, that's going to be on you. My point is that you are. Here's the rub, is that you are free to believe that. In other words, you are free to believe that your right to travel, your right to operate a motor vehicle without a license is protected. You shouldn't have to. It's protected under X Constitution. You are also free to believe that the judge, you shouldn't have to require a judge to agree with you for that. That's fine. What I think where I am saying, where I'm coming from, is that you're alone in that regard. Even if you cite these individuals who talk about the Ninth Amendment, the Napolitano, Gorsuch, etc., or Barnett, you're still alone in that determination that the Ninth Amendment, as these people and as these other people that you support define the Ninth Amendment, you're still alone in that regard, because you don't have the supporting evidence within our jurisprudence to suggest that is the case when it comes to operating a motor vehicle. Again, you don't have to say that you require judicial review. I'm just saying that you're alone in this regard. You're on an island here.
Well, here's the deal, Arty. I disagree with that alone. Honestly, and the fact that you have many individuals willing to stand up for their right to be able to drive and to travel clearly demonstrates that I'm not alone. Okay, so there are many individuals that do agree that we do have that right, and so
Okay.
there's actually
Well,
there's an actual
no. I'm sorry. I'm interrupted. Go ahead. You were finishing thought.
The problem with case law, and you know this factually as a lawyer, the case law is like a house built on shifting sand. You have different opinions from different judges, and you have cases that are overturned on a daily basis, in fact. So this whole idea that I now have to surrender my inalienable rights or my unenumerated rights to a determination by somebody else is not in agreement with the Declaration of Independence. It's not in agreement with the Constitution. And so, ultimately, one of the things that you said in our first video as it pertains to the Declaration, because I actually asked you, whether or not the Declaration of Independence was a legal document. And you said that it wasn't, that it was, I think you said it was a document of principles or standards or something like that. Is that
a statement. It was a statement of principles, a document of principles, and going back to what you said earlier, it's something that judges can use as a secondary source for interpretation, just as Scalia did in terms of Hendrick versus DC versus oh my God, I'm forgetting the case now. The Second Amendment rights case. He used it as a secondary source as to frame the interpretation of the Constitution. So yes.
okay? So, but are you still holding to the belief that it's only a statement of principles, or are you now saying that it is in fact a legal document?
I still hold that it is still a statement of principles and not enforceable law, i.e., somebody cannot make a claim or make submit a grievance saying my rights were violated under the pursuant to the Declaration of the Independence. No, I'm
Okay.
not. I'm not saying that.
If that is indeed the case, okay, would you agree that the states are subject to the U.S. codes?
It depends on the state code.
Well, I'm talking about
Excuse me. I'm sorry. Can you repeat that statement? Sorry.
right. Would you agree that the states are subject to the U.S. codes?
It depends on the U.S. on what the code is about, the subject matter of the code. Yes.
So the U.S. codes are not laws?
They are law. They're an organization of law.
So you would agree that the U.S. codes are laws?
Yes.
So here's the problem then, Arty, because the Declaration of Independence is in fact placed in the U.S. codes.
Okay.
It's the it's the first one listed. So if we're going to say that they're laws and they're not just uh, uh, principles stated, then the states are under obligation to uphold those laws. And since that being the case, the people have the inalienable rights declared to them by means of the Declaration of Independence. And it is undisputable that it is a law and that they are legal documents because, one of the things you said last time was, well, they weren't considered a legal document because of the fact that, that the Congress, the first Congress, wasn't like the second Congress.
Right. There were two continental congresses. Correct.
Right. But the problem that argument doesn't deal with is the fact that the second Congress actually adopted the Declaration of Independence. So even
Where?
even though you have a separate Congress, they still adopt.
The second Continental Congress relying on the Declaration as a basis or a source material on the formulation of the Constitution does not ergo make the Declaration law. Because again, the Second Continental Congress was put together to create the Constitution. They were not the Congress, the Congress that was formulated under said Constitution, right? You understand that, correct? Like in other words, the first Congress of the United States was not the Second Continental Congress, or it was not made up of the Second Continental Congress. They were the first Congress that was voted by the people pursuant to that newly ratified Constitution.
Right, but I guess we're having a difficulty here is, look, if the First Continental Congress had the right to establish these things, and the fact that the second adopted them, okay, then ultimately the idea that these are only principles are no longer correct, because not only not only that, in 1920, I think it was 1926, the Congress, that's when they included the Declaration of Independence in the US codes. So even if we go to that argument and say, well, it's not a legal document because it wasn't done the same way, once Congress chose to include that in the US codes, that ends the discussion.
No, and I've already been able to look it up, and this is what I was able to find in our discussion. I've already have been able to find, because I recall this from our previous discussion of talking about the Declaration of Independence. And I'll quote to you. This is Secor versus Oklahoma, 2016 U.S. District Lexus 146122. To the extent that the plaintiff premises any Section 1983 claim upon the Declaration of Independence, such a claim is not recognized in the law. Quote, the Declaration is a state of ideals, not law. Quoting Sweppy Limited Partnership versus Mora County, New Mexico, 81 F sub 3rd, 1075, 1172, 2015. Another quote. Under the Constitution, the court is bound by events subsequent to the Declaration of Independence, quoting Rhode Island versus Massachusetts, 37 U.S. 657. Such quote-unquote claims under the Declaration of Independence are subject to dismissal with prejudice. In other words, the Declaration of Independence does not grant rights that may be pursued through the judicial system. And I can go on forever, but that was the point I was making, that the Declaration of Independence is a statement of ideals and not enforceable law. And I have the backing of the judiciary to say that. Again, you are saying that you don't need the backing of the judiciary to say that. What I am telling you is that good luck with that, because you're on your own, and and it's not exactly supported by the evidence given.
Well, here's the problem again. As I pointed out, as regards to case law is like shifting sand. It gets overruled all the time. That fact is undisputable. And, even if we were to accept these judicial decisions, we have to go to the origination of where they got that determination. So, yeah, a judge could say, the sky is green if he wants to. Does that make it green? This is actually something.
Well, that's a bit of a non sequitur, because we're not going to a judge to determine whether or not the sky is green, right? The judge's duty is to interpret the law to which he is subject to, right?
But what I'm saying.
No. Here's what I'm saying, and what the rub is. You are saying, like, judges' opinions are overturned on a daily basis. I'm not sure I agree with that, but because I do think that stare decisis is a thing that is practiced in the vast majority of courts in this country. But the idea is that our nation is founded upon both the implication, the adherence to both laws passed by statute, laws under statute, in other words, passed by Congress, and also laws that are interpreted by the judiciary, aka the common law, the old school common law understanding of how laws was created, which was judge-made law. A common law wouldn't make sense if judges didn't adhere to the decisions made prior. judges being overruled is, I don't think judges being overruled is as common as what you think it is. I'm not saying it doesn't happen on occasion, or even more than just on occasion, but the idea of common law wouldn't make sense. Common law wouldn't be a thing if it really was overturned on an everyday basis like you claim it to be.
Well, I mean, we're going to judicial interpretation, and we know factually that there are cases that have been overturned, and we know factually that there are cases even within the Supreme Court that are wrongly decided. Okay, as a lawyer,
I don't deny that, of course, right? Correct.
That there are wrongly decided cases. So, it makes judicial interpretation subjective. Okay, it is not objective, especially when the overreaching purpose of it is to expand upon the government authority and to diminish the original purpose of government, which is to protect the rights. The judicial interpretation was not there at the founding to say this is what the Declaration of Independence is. It wasn't there to weigh its legal status. It was established as the foundational document of this nation. Now, if we're going to diminish its value because some dude in a black robe is going to say that, well, okay, that's his opinion. He's entitled to that opinion, but to say that others cannot have a different view or interpretation, and that they're now subject to that interpretation, is to deny them their inalienable rights, and that is part of the problem. And I'm not alone as regards to this. Many individuals feel, and correctly so, that the government has gone way beyond the original intent as founded in the Declaration of Independence and even the Constitution.
Well,
So, I mean, we can argue, that judges make these determinations here and there, and like I said, it's a choice. What do we choose to accept? That's what the consent of the government is all about.
Well, that's the thing where I'm a firm adherent to what we would say is the rule of law, right? The understanding, and the Constitution would be a meaningless piece of paper if people did not believe in the rule of law and its adherence to it. And part of that adherence to it is the understanding that the legislature makes the laws, the executive enforces the laws, and the judiciary interprets the laws. And if the judiciary says, like, no, the legislature overstepped their bounds, or no, the executive overstepped their bounds, and if the executive says, no, screw you, I'm going to do what I want, then we've lost all understanding. We've lost the rule of law. And so that's the problem that we're going to have here, is that if you're going to say that I'm not going to adhere to whatever the heck the judiciary says because I interpret it differently, then we come down to our original disagreement here, that we're going to subject ourselves to anarchy, because we have issues in place to challenge the ruling. We have the system of appeals. We can appeal the determination of the trial judge. We can even go further and appeal to the next level on the in the circuit. That's how we're able to impose checks even on the judiciary, to say, no, the judiciary got it wrong. This is what the law actually says. But if you're saying that that's not even enough, and even if they say, like, they disagree with you, it's like, no, you're correct, and you go through all the chains, and you're saying that, no, regardless of whatever they say, What do you want? I mean, how are we going to function as a society if you're not willing to adhere to some sort of check that's actually available in our current system of government? When if you're just going to say screw it, I'm going to go my own way, regardless of what somebody tells me.
Well, that's what the founding fathers did, Artie. I mean, you know.
Well, if you want to go your own, well, dude, if you want to go your own way like that, go for it. But don't get surprised when you are thrown in handcuffs and get cited for not driving with a license.
Well, here's the thing, Artie. You said 4 things. You know, if we're going to, you said that if we're going to throw the Constitution away as a document,
I'm not throwing I'm not throwing the Constitution away. The appellate process is part of the Constitution.
Listen. You had made that argument. If we're going to do that, you know, the problem is we're throwing the Declaration of Independence away as not being a legal document, and so the problem is you know, my inalienable rights are not subject to legislation. Okay. Now I could simply say that, and you could say, well, that's just your private view, but I will prove that, you know, by using a judge again to support that conclusion. So I have here a judge that speaks as regards to that. He speaks regards to the 9th and the 10th. And here's what he says.
Specifically on the applicability on the right to travel, or just simply on the 9th Amendment in general?
Well, not just the 9th Amendment in general, but also as pertains to the individual right.
Okay. See, that's again that again goes to my point, is that the applicability of that judge's opinion on the 9th Amendment to you saying that you don't need a license to drive. We're missing that connection there. But I apologize. Go ahead and play your comment.
Okay, so that's a legal expert saying these cannot be legislated away. They cannot be taken away by the executive as well. So
again, is he talking specifically about licensing the operation of a motor vehicle?
He's talking specifically about the 9th Amendment and how these are rights, as he says. You list right.
And that's you're basically not answering the question, which again is proving my point. He is not specific. I'm looking for a specific connection between his claim about the 9th Amendment and driving without a license. Okay, and what I'm saying, here's the rub. You are the one who's making that link, and that's where it comes down to a subjective interpretation. You are subjectively interpreting what he is saying to, I don't need a license to travel.
Okay, here's the problem, Marty. When you discuss your points of view, I do not interrupt you. You've been interrupting me quite a bit lately. So, it's hard for me to formulate my points if that's what's going to continue to happen.
All right.
You know,
I apologize. Go ahead.
so,
I'm sorry.
so ultimately, I'm making an argument here, and my argument is based upon the Declaration of Independence. It's based upon inalienable rights, and it's based upon the Ninth. Now, these are subject to interpretation. The judicial system that you have is one that has a variety of disagreement on that. And the fact is, even if you look at those Ninth Amendment cases that have come before the Supreme Court, you have a variety of views on the Ninth. Okay? So to say that, well, it doesn't apply because one judge said that it doesn't apply or another judge said it doesn't apply, doesn't mean that it doesn't apply. It means that that is his that is their individual interpretation, one that may or may not be changed by another judicial determination. So, you know, we ultimately we can disagree as to that point, but it is an argument that I am making, and I believe that it is backed by the fact that, based upon what these legal experts are saying as regards to the Ninth, as regards to the Declaration of Independence, no, they're not specifically addressing a right to drive, but they are discussing what the Ninth Amendment means, what these individual rights mean. And so, based upon what they're saying, and the only reason why I'm including them is because that is the biggest problem that we have is a lot of anti-sovereigns will say, well, you don't have any sort of backing or whatever for the determinations you make, and I kid you not, Arty, I get this all the time, and most sovereigns do, that we're out of our mind, we're not in our right frame of mind, or whatever, but there is reason why we're saying what we're saying. Okay, now ultimately we can disagree, and I'm okay that if we disagree on that issue, so, but these are the defenses as to what I am stipulating as to what is my right. And ultimately, maybe this system may infringe upon my rights to assert its rights, but ultimately it is an infringement, and I'm just as entitled to my rights as the founding fathers were, which rejected the government that was over them. So if I choose to reject this government because of its failure to remain within the limitations of the Constitution, then so be it. And if they must choose to arrest me for that, so be it. I'm no threat to nobody, but I'm not going to have my rights diminished by judicial review or a state trying to assert rights that are uh, um, trying to supersede my own rights.
Okay. So, well, there's a lot there. So the first thing I would say is that you, and I think you already pointed it out, that you were willing to say, look at this judge making this determination, but then he might be getting overruled. But all at the same time, you're going to be like, oh, well, look at these judicial experts who supposedly agree with me. I mean, that's suggesting that the judge making a determination that doesn't conform to what your belief is, not a legal expert. Somebody, they may have just as strong credentials, if not greater, or perhaps even greater credentials than the people that you're citing in the first place. That's one thing. Second of all, again, I go to my point that you had already admitted these quotations that you're getting from Napolitano and Gorsuch speak specifically about the Ninth Amendment in general and what the Ninth Amendment means. You are therefore gleaning from that your interpretation that because they say Ninth Amendment is X, Y, and Z, ergo, I don't need a license to drive. That is, I feel like I'm repeating myself because that is where your subjective interpretation begins. That's where their ideas of what the Ninth Amendment says ends, and your subjective interpretation of what they are saying and how it applies to the right to travel begins. And that is your subjective interpretation, not something that they are actually even saying in the first place. So I would disagree with you in the sense that they are supporting your claim, your argument that you don't need a license to travel, you don't need a license to drive, or that the state's regulation of said ability is constitutional based on what they are saying. You are gleaning your own interpretation from them. Thirdly, the issue that we're having here when it comes to the issue of rights and how they are afforded to us, sure, you can go ahead and say that, I don't have to adhere to whatever the government says is the Constitution is. But again, that only furthers my base argument that your interpretation of what the Constitution is based upon your own personal preference, your own personal idea of what the Constitution should be. And that's fine. You're entitled to believe that. You're entitled to have that opinion. You're entitled to fight for that opinion. But what I am saying here to you is that you and other individuals are not being supported by various case law and various precedent. And I know you're saying that, and I know you're basically dismissing judicial review, judicial precedent. But again, that only furthers my idea that my base argument that you guys don't want anybody to adhere to whatever laws that are placed upon you. In other words, long story short, you are all but confirming to me that the laws are whatever you say they are. Period. End of story. And that if anybody disagrees with you saying, no, you don't have this right, no, you don't have this, ability, you are saying, nope, that's a violation of my constitutional rights, and you're basing that purely upon your own subjective opinion, because even the people that you're citing aren't necessarily agreeing with you on the specific in the specific context to which you're citing them on.
Well, I disagree with what you're saying completely. It's not a subjective point of view. It is a point of view of many individuals, and my interpretation that I'm sharing is an interpretation based upon the premise of what legal experts are saying as regards to the ninth. So I'm not simply stating myself, well, this is what it means. I'm using these legal experts that are considered legal experts by your system that you agree with. So, I use Judge Napolitano, Supreme Justice Gorsuch, the legal expert Randy, and so, I'm not coming to this without these things, and so that is how I come to the conclusion that I come. When you say that, we're just deciding what laws to abide by, what you're failing to recognize, Arty, is that the very laws that you're wanting to agree with and say are obligatory for others to follow, you know, it's a failure to recognize that if those individuals had the right to establish those laws and abolish the laws prior to that held them in bondage, and that is my right. That is everybody's right. And this right is not determined based upon a location on the earth. Again, as I pointed out before, the earth is not the property of the government, it's property of God. My intention is to live peacefully amongst my brothers and sisters of this planet. Now, if they're going to try to, hinder me in my living peacefully, as I feel is correct, that is a choice that they will ultimately have to uh, answer for when they meet their creator, because God made us equal. He didn't put one over the other, He made us equal. I have every right to reject the things that this government decides, just as they had every right to reject the government prior to it. And so, I don't know if you're familiar with this man called Thomas More, but he said something very profound when he was being judged. He made this argument that some men claim the earth is round and others say that it is flat. But if it is flat, can the law make it round? But if it is round, can the legislature make it flat? And that really is the point. You know, I actually do respect individuals in law enforcement, and if I were there where I could protect them in a way that I saw that I could, I would. But here's the thing. I expect that same respect from them. And, ultimately, we each may disagree on this issue. And it makes sense that we would disagree, since there is disagreement even within the Supreme Justices as to the meaning of the ninth and individual rights. If their interpretation can have disagreement, so can we. But at the end of the day, I would say, let's at least be respectful, and accept the other's point of view. Whether or not we agree with it, we can accept that that's the other's point of view. It may not be any less or more subjective than our own. Say otherwise is, well, that is an individual choice, but
Well,
you get my.
no, I get your point. I understand the idea of being respectful. And I think I mentioned this before in our disagreements, is that where I'm most hostile is when people who try to get monetary gain off of this ideals and off of this belief system, because I think they're taking advantage of people. And they're putting themselves into a situation that even worse than the situation that they already were in. But to go to your point, I think ultimately we're probably going to have to agree to disagree in how we are interpreting the law and its applicability to each other, and the idea of whether or not certain laws can or can't be enforced. But I at least appreciate that we're able to have a conversation like this without, you know, the name calling and shouting. So, you know, I'll have my fun. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to have my fun, but, you know, I'm also going to be respectful where respect is given. So, so we can have that common ground there. But
Yeah.
I think we can go ahead and wrap this up. And
I would like to say something in conclusion.
sure, go for it. And and I'll have the last word.
Okay.
Okay. So again, I wish to thank you, Arty, for our live debate over these issues. I wish to thank all those who were part by being here and listening in. And basically, in conclusion, what I'd like to say is this. You know, God created us all to be equal, to treat each other with love, and not to take advantage of each other, not to hurt each other, not to do things bad towards each other. And there is much controversy over these issues. There are people who believe one way and other people who believe differently. You have sovereign people who wish to live more independent from the government, and then you have other individuals, anti-sovereigns, who wish to live under a more structured system, and that's fine. We should all be able to accept that people of different ideas and faiths or whatever may have a different view, and we should be all able to respect each other despite that. You know, I mentioned this before. I see a lot of anti-sovereign videos out there where sovereigns are being made fun of. And it's sad because even if we disagree on these issues, ultimately, the Declaration of Independence does in fact say that when government does become a threat to those fundamental freedoms and rights, that we have a right to abolish the government. And certainly the founding fathers did so. They chose to violate the king's laws, which was being held over them. And so we now know factually that the Declaration of Independence is more than simply some standards or simply a letter to declare their independence from another nation. We know this because not only was it accepted by the Second Congress, but we also know that Congress in 1926, I believe, that they chose to make this as part of the U.S. codes, the U.S. laws. And so, regardless what we may think or say to the contrary, those are the facts. And though there may be many different interpretations from many different judges, ultimately, at the end of the day, we still have that right to reject those things that we never consented to. That is what the Declaration of Independence clearly stipulates. And so I would also include the fact
that Scripture actually tells us that man has a tendency to dominate man to his injury. And that is why I believe, as a Christian sovereign constitutionalist, that Scripture also says that God is going to step in. And because of the fact that not only are these governments failing to recognize God's sovereignty, but he's failing to recognize the rights and the freedoms that he has endowed upon his children. We are all his children. And I would say we should all try a little better to love each other a little better, to respect each other a little better, and to live together in peace. With that, God bless you all. And again, thank you. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Archangel, for that closing. I will end it to say that the reason, I would say one of the primary reasons why many people, get their kicks out of some of these videos is not just simply, seeing somebody get, injured. I don't think that's part of the issue. The issue is that, and at least for me personally as an attorney, I look at somebody making an argument that, and the thing is, these are arguments that you haven't necessarily made, and I want to make that clear, Archangel. Is when somebody goes in to a traffic court and try and claim that the fringes on a flag somehow means the courtroom is not what it says it is. That the idea that all courtrooms, regardless of how we grew up and how we were taught and how we understood how civics works and how our system of government works, that a traffic court in the middle of Denver, Colorado is somehow under a maritime admiralty jurisdiction, most of people would find that absurd, out of hand, because that doesn't make sense to anybody who understands common sense of what traffic court's supposed to be, of what maritime admiralty law is supposed to be. And the fact that a flag in the presence of a courtroom, the way it's decorated, somehow changes the legal system that the courtroom is subject to or is operating under, most people find it absurd. And most people find that people making these arguments is absurd. And so, yeah, there's going to be people who are going to get entertainment by this because the people somehow, for whatever reason, act so surprised when they find out that their arguments aren't working, and they somehow find themselves in contempt of court. And most people are going to look at that as like, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. What were you thinking was going to happen? Why are you making this argument in the first place? And then going into the whole idea of traffic and the right to travel is oftentimes most people also, even before sovereign citizens movements, most people understood the whole idea of the highway traffic lawyer. The guy who really likes to make an argument with a cop whenever they're stopped for a traffic violation, when in reality they should be making their arguments in front of a judge and not at a traffic violation. And then when you have these people, and most people will say like, look, I'm following the law. I'm doing what I'm doing. I don't get stopped by the cops. If I do get stopped by the cops, yeah, sometimes it's a pain in the ass. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes I'm able to fight it. I don't understand why this guy is giving everybody a hard time, especially in and not all the circumstances, but especially in circumstances when the cop is not being a hard ass, the cop is not being a dick. He's just trying to do his job that he's authorized to do. So that, to me, is where you're seeing a lot of people make fun of, have a laugh, get entertainment from a lot of these videos. So that's where I wanted to point that out, because I know that's something that you've emphasized in our discussion. With all that being said, while I have strong disagreements with everything that sovereign citizens argue with all, or at least 99% of what they argue, I'm also open to the idea of being open to an academic discussion. In other words, if you want to talk about what are rights, how are they enforced, how are they interpreted, how are they governed, how does a civil society function? I mean, we can have that sort of academic discussion. My thing, what I do here in this channel is I try to emphasize what is. Not what could be, not what should be, what is authorized, what is allowed. What can the state do, what can't the state do? And that's where I'm coming from in that regard. But if you want to, but when it comes to what should happen, what can happen, what we hope to happen, I mean, I'm open to having a discussion with that all day, every day. I love that. I live for that. I'm all about political theory, political discussions, and the nature of how we can function as a society better than what we are now, because it could always be better. So with all of that, I really thank you for coming in. I really thank you for having taken the time to come in and discuss your views. I apologize if I was more interrupting this time around. I really didn't catch that, and so I apologize ahead of time for that. But
It's okay.
But I thank you again. I think we were able to have a one-to-one. I think we're able to understand each other a bit more, without obviously getting heated, without name calling and this and that and the other. So I think this was a productive discussion. And again, I thank you very much for coming on. I know you were willing to come in, and I'm willing to be a gracious host.
Yes. Well, I thank you also, Arty, and I do think that this is a very good discussion, and it helps people to understand what's the different views on these things. And so, you know, um, I just want to say to you and your viewers, God bless you all, and let's just live together in peace. Live and let live.
Right on.
All right. Take care, Artie.
Take care. Yes, thank you.
Bye-bye.
You have a good night. Take care of yourself. All right.
Okay, you too.
Yep. Guys, give me 1 second. I'm gonna go to restroom right quick, and then I'll be back for some final thoughts. All right, 1 second. Okay, I'm back. Okay, so I think that was fine. Like I said, I'm going to disagree with ArchAngel, forever and ever on his interpretation. But at least we're able to have a cordial conversation about it. So, I mean, I'm all for that. It doesn't all have to be shit posting and drunken mockery day in, day out, right? Right? So, on that note, why are people talking about cannibalism in my chat? What the hell? Anyway, Mexican Bay didn't give me his number again, so I wasn't able to call in on Friday or Saturday. So that's on him. And honestly, I don't think he's really even worth my time. So, as far as what's in the plans in the works, I don't know. I might post some more meme videos, but in the meantime, I'll just keep scouring, seeing who's on, seeing who's making a name, and seeing who wants to discuss. So I'll keep you guys in touch. If not, I'll probably set up a new bingo night. I was actually thinking of, instead of a sovereign citizen bingo night, I might do a specific Karen bingo night, since apparently Karens are all the rage nowadays. I don't know why. Sovereign citizens were the original Karens, in my opinion, but I might have a Karen bingo coming up soon, so I'll have to curate some videos to watch for that, and then I'll keep you posted. Check out my Discord. Keep in touch. And I thank you guys for watching. Much appreciated. As always, your support is greatly, greatly appreciated. Thank you guys, and I will see you. Oh God, anti-vax bingo. I don't need to deal with that right now. But I think Karens will be a much better topic at the time. I noticed that like a lot of like frauditors are there. That's also a very trending group as well. Well, who knows? They're sovereign citizen light anyway. So Karens are a unique bunch. All right, guys. Thank you for watching. Much appreciated. And I will see you next time. Take care.
Back together. I've never even bothered to look to see the